Hi guys, thanks for tuning in to an episode of Nuggets News. Well, today we've got a very special guest, and that is Dr. David Nixon, Aussie doctor who's been exposing the nanotech in the shots. We're going to be diving into his battle with the medical board, digital ID, where all this is going. And David, you've been doing some fantastic work for a couple of years now, so we're all grateful for that. And welcome to the show.
Thank you very much, Alex. Great to be here. Just before we dive into it, I've got a bit of a speech disability, so if it gets a bit difficult to understand, let me know and I'll try and slow down a bit.
No, that's fine, mate. What's important is that we get this information out to our audience. And what was your journey? Because a lot of us in the medical industry have kind of woken up. I've told my story to our followers about quitting pharmacy in 2017 when I realised it was all corrupt, and more of these doctors and health professionals are kind of waking up now. So, what was your journey, and what started to wake you up?
Right. Well, I was very much tied into general practice in 2019. Um, I am a Kiwi doc. I trained at Otago University. I've been in Brisbane since 2009. I worked in a small rural hospital in New Zealand. I did my internship at Napier Hospital. One of my mentors there, Richard Meach, had been, or at that time he was on the New Zealand Infectious Disease Committee, and I can remember him telling me that their worst case scenario for a pandemic was 30% loss of life across the whole population in 3 weeks. So, that was sort of what I wondered, whether that was what was going to happen. And given the way everything was rolling out, that was my expectation. Clearly, with what was happening, the worst was about to happen.
Yeah.
So I spent quite a bit of my time early 2020 trying to figure out how we were going to react to that, how we could best look after our patients in the community, whether it's going to be triaging, testing, or how it was going to look, how we get open the door from the front desk, because we just had an automatic door, and so it was those sort of practical things. Then at the time I did the odd weekend, and I had a patient who was from Wuhan, and his wife and daughter were in the hospital being tested for COVID, and he wanted to be tested. I think this was January or early February 2020, and we had nothing at that stage. And I can remember ringing public health to say, well, this is the situation, and they were all geared up to tell me that that if he tested positive, then we'd need to have the room quarantined for a week and deep cleaned, and the performance was quite staggering. So certainly, I think the whole charade has been very much focused on general, on medicine as a whole, but general practices in particular. So all the research, everything that's coming through, it was all coloured towards general practice.
Yeah.
I did my 9 hours of training with the TGA on the vaccines. And there was initially it was just supposed to be frontline healthcare workers and the elderly, and there certainly were reports if we went digging, but there weren't any mainstream reports of any problems coming through within the first couple of months of the vaccines being rolled out, which was, of course, 12 months later. And we'll come back to that.
Yeah.
Um, right, and then it changed, of course. It all became safe and effective, and gradually we were going to inject the 60-year-olds, and then the 50-year-olds, and then the 40-year-olds, and then the pregnant woman, and then the adolescents, and then the children, and just stopped making sense.
Yeah.
Um, quite early on, obviously. It was obviously not making sense to a lot of people
Yeah.
very early on, but we just gone through accreditation with the ICGP. We still had all our posters on the wall about patient autonomy and patient consent and patient rights, and the only one on the poster that continued was the patient's right to complain. That one persisted, but everything else seemed to just evaporate in a puff of smoke.
Yeah.
So I spent, 2020 learning about early treatment options and ivermectin and Artemisia alternatives to ivermectin, and what was happening around the world with the frontline doctors in the US, and Dr. Sankara Chetty in South Africa, and Jackie Stone in Zimbabwe, and Tesla in the UK, and various other people around the planet trying to understand uh, where we could use hydroxychloroquine and ivermectin and NAC and all that stuff. Yeah, and then in early 22, by which time the vaccines were well and truly rolled out, and there were a number of groups around the world that have been looking at the vaccine, and I had the opportunity to look at my own blood and saw these abnormal structures in my own blood, and also had an opportunity to look at the vaccine, Pfizer Comirnaty vaccine, and clearly that looked really strange. So I decided at that point to buy myself a microscope and start looking. There was an old poster at Otago Medical School that I remember quite clearly, which said, "For every mistake made for not doing, 10 are made for not looking." So I was determined to start looking. And yeah, it went from there.
Fantastic. Well, we'll get into some of those slides and images soon. But yeah, I guess for me, that was one of the first light bulb moments when they were saying, this is safe and effective for, pregnant women and kids and all this type of stuff when we'd never used mRNA in humans on mass before. Like it was just lies from the get go. And the scariest thing even now is how many of these health professionals still don't even understand how these things work, still pushing them as safe and effective, even though it's pretty commonly accepted now that they don't stop it, don't stop transmission, all this type of thing. It's this brainwashing that medicine's become a religion, a cult where you're not allowed to question it, and it has this hierarchical structure, which they're now obviously pushing to get everyone to sign on to these, World Health Organization treaties and whatever, so that doctors don't have autonomy to make decisions anymore. It's going to be, whatever the people running the planet want. And then through AI and this digital system, you won't be able to be a dissident and push back against all this. So we'll get into all that as well. But do you want to share your screen for people at home and show us some of the things that you found under the microscope? We'll get into what they possibly could be and maybe how your thoughts on it have changed from when you first saw this type of thing. Were you completely unaware, and now with collaboration with other doctors, do we have more of an idea of what these structures are and what they might be doing?
Right, Alex. Let me just. I was fortunate to be supported by an IT company who helped me put together this website, and I'll let you play this video from your end later, because it'll show better. But basically, this has got a lot of the early talks in interviews that I did, and a lot of photos of Pfizer, and also a few other photos of the other two. This has also got my bits and pieces with the medical boards. I've tried to put the allegations in my response to those allegations. So that's all there as well. But in terms of my experiences with looking at the vaccines and looking at blood, I've actually started, just let me know if this is coming across. Can you see this website now? So I've started a second website. I've actually started my own journal called the Journal of Nanotechnology, Countdown to 2030. I started off by thinking, well, I start at volume 1, because if I'm still volume 5 and count down to 0, because we're still going in 2030, it'll need to change. But then I decided, okay, I'll be conventional. So I started volume 1, issue 1, and I've written 7 papers that are up on here now, and this really provides all of the background. So I'll just open this first one on Pfizer community. And people can just download this PDF if they want a copy of it. So I did look at getting this published in the International Journal of Vaccine Treatment Practice and Research, but it was just taking too long. And I knew that there was other things I wanted to write about. So I just set my own forum up for doing it. And as I said, there's about 7 papers here now, and I think I'll give you a bit of a feel for where it's gone. I've tried to put a general audience summary in here in terms of helping people to, making the language a bit simpler. It turns out that the actual drying of a drop under the microscope is a very useful process. The actual process of drying encourages self-assembly, and the whole thing has been somewhat serendipitous, combined with a fair amount of obsessive compulsion to try and get some answers. But this paper walks through basically my experiences and what I did and how I did it. So I really wanted to document what I'd seen in the order I'd seen things. So this is the paper to do with Pfizer. So this is what a drop of Pfizer looks like under the microscope into dark field. So dark field microscopy is basically bright field microscopy with a different condenser under the stage of the microscope. And the light that illuminates the sample is reflected light rather than coming straight underneath. So we get a black background, and we're able to see more of the components of what's in the sample. Yeah. And it's got a long history, but it's basically been demonized for reasons that I'll go into. But even early on, the way the sample dried and the way that materials collected on the surface and the way it crystallized was really quite strange. So just coming back to here, we'd expect in a normal situation that looking at a vaccine would just be like looking at water, be completely transparent. So the fact that there were loads and loads of bright, sparkly material just didn't make any sense at all. And this was a structure that sort of floated into view on top of a drying drop of the Pfizer. So the way I got my samples was these were injections that had been drawn up by the practice nurses and hadn't been used. So rather than just throwing them away, I kept needles and syringes that had already been ready for use. So this is what was going in people's arms in 22. In liquid form, there was all that's so this is the same structure, obviously, but so this is the interface between where it's liquid and where it's more of a gel. But there was all sorts of strange shapes. And this is relatively low magnification. So this is only 200 times the magnification. So these structures are not hard to see. This one here would be almost big enough to see under a magnifying glass.
So what are the playing devil's advocate? Like, what are the people that dismiss this? Do they try and say that there's a simple explanation for any of this, or are they just people, refuse to talk about it?
But it hasn't changed from what's happening now, Alex. People are not engaging with the photos. They're not looking and saying, "Oh, that looks strange. That looks normal." They just, at the moment, so I was on a conversation with Michael Griffith and Paul Easterhouse on Cafe Lockdown a couple of nights ago, and the feedback from them is that what I'm saying is actually detracting from the message of other doctors that are expressing concerns about the DNA contamination and so forth.
Yeah.
But people are still not engaging with the pictures. So, I'm trying my best to make these pictures available in a form that people can look at. So this website is easy to find from my website, which is just drdavidnixon.com. There's a link straight here from the front page.
Do you think there's a few different components to all of this? As you say, there's the DNA contamination that's been coming out. Then we've got all the spike protein issues itself. And then you've got the nanotech. And I think, to me, we've seen such huge intra-batch variability. Some of these batches have got a huge high death rate. Other batches have got almost zero side effects. And then we've got everything in between. So it just shows you there was no standardization. We don't really know what went into what and why some affected people different than others. Was it storage? Was it administration? Like, what are your thoughts around all of that?
Well, it begs some interesting questions, doesn't it? So I did a Substack on this recently, and I've written about it. So the official claim that we were told about with Operation Warp Speed was that billions of doses were designed, tested, approved, manufactured, and distributed globally within 1 year. So the timeframes is that listed there, January 2020, the genetic sequence of the virus or the spike protein was published. That in itself was pretty amazing, right? December, the emergency use authorization was granted in the US. By mid 2021, billions had eligibly been produced, shipped, and injected. So it's worth spending a bit of time just looking at those claims. So I had a friend of mine who did some in-depth analysis of this, and millions or thousands to millions to billions, we sort of it's quite difficult to get your head around in terms of what it means. If you're wanting to scale up even something simple like a paper clip to manufacture in the billions, you end up needing to have your own steel mills and things. So the process logistics are huge with anything. And obviously, the more complex the product, the more difficult it is. So we just identified 5 bottlenecks in the process that you can't get around. How are you going to produce the glass vials? Because you actually need to have furnaces. You actually need to have facilities. And so I'm going to spend most of my time talking about Pfizer community, and that's responsible for 66% of the vaccines in Australia. So it's the majority. So we just talk about Pfizer for a second. So the Pfizer injections went into multi-use vials, which had a highly researched and specialized glass called Valor glass, VALOR, and I've written quite a bit on that in one or two of the papers that are on the website. So to actually develop that glass took years, let alone manufacturing it. So that's a significant, 66% of 5 billion or whatever, 2/3 of 5 billion is, still a lot, right?
Yeah.
So, somewhere between 3 and 4 billion glass vials, and sure, you can divide it by 6, but you still need a lot, right? The actual filling and finishing of the vaccine or the injection is a bottleneck in itself, and it requires some intensive validation and not to mention regulation. The actual capacity to produce the mRNA, which was, obviously part of the narrative, there was no capacity to produce that in 2020 officially, right? And that's same with the lipid nanoparticles. Long lead times and serious orders of magnitude from where we were to where we needed to be, and that you can't overcome those problems quickly or easily. Now, I'm just remembering off the top of my head, but I think this is right. So in 2019, the dry ice production in the US was 21,500 metric ton. The following year, they needed 24 million tons of dry ice. The logistics, even just for the dry ice to keep everything cold. Oh, one thing I did forget to mention was the Valor. One of the key things about the Valor glass is it's resistant to EMF transmit. It's EMF resistant, if you like, or
Interesting.
shielding, shields from EMF, and why would they do that? Why was that important? so there's to be able to do what they did was impossible.
Do you
So I put
think that it's possible that they were developing this, underground in secret, these black projects?
oh they had
Yeah,
to
yeah,
be.
yeah, yeah,
This was a 10-year project
yeah,
minimum. Well, production wise, it was at least 6 to 10 years. So what we've got here on this table, so I called this the corridor of industrial possibility, and we've got on one axis the complexity from the paperclip to the RNA vaccine, and then the time to reach billions on the other axis. And you can see down the bottom there, we've got the Hubble paperclip. It took 30 years to reach global billions prediction of just the paperclip. So I'll put two dotted lines there. So most businesses are sort of fall somewhere near the yellow line. The washing machine was a bit slow to get off the ground, but you can see the ballpoint pen and the light bulb sort of track along that line. What it shows is it's quicker to produce things that are more complex. There's something wrong with that. I have to work on it. But the key thing is the iPhone, which was incredibly well supported by governments and industry and less complicated than the vaccine, took 15 years to produce billions. The vaccine is just so far off to the left and in the impossibility zone that I've called it the warp speed fiction zone.
yeah.
Or the warp speed fiction. It's impossible. It just
Yeah.
doesn't. It, it's
Yes.
so the other interesting thing about that is that in 1998, Australia was negotiating what's called the Mutual Recognition Agreement with the EU. So, as far as I could determine, all of the vaccines in Australia came from Europe. They weren't produced in the States. They came by and large from Germany and Belgium. In 1998, with this mutual recognition agreement, Australia agreed to hand over the rights to quality control and all audits for anything that was manufactured in Europe. Okay, so the idea was we like each other, we know each other's processes. So if we produce drugs in Australia, you can trust us. You don't need to have another look at them. And if you produce drugs, then we don't need to look at them. So for all of the 9 hours of TJ training, it was all bollocks because they hadn't actually done any quality audits at all. They didn't need to. So that it was all structured in such a way that the drugs could come in from Europe without anybody looking at them.
What what do you think was the purpose of the nanotech from all the discussions you've had with colleagues though? Was it just is it getting into this stuff about 5G and frequencies and mind control and making us sick, or is it for the first iteration for where they want to hook everyone up to the mainframe with future nanotech, or getting ready for the digital ID and digital chipping, or how do you see it all fitting together?
Yeah. So obviously given that quite a lot of thought over the last 3 years. And it's impossible to figure out at what the exact purposes are. There's such a huge gap between where the science is supposed to be and where the science actually is. And because of that, it's really hard to figure out what aspect of the agenda this is going to fulfill. But clearly, it could be involved with transmission or censoring, or but to speculate any further than that is just too difficult, because the science is not supposed to be able to do this, right?
Yeah.
And so one of my colleagues pointed out the fact that 90+% of research is actually dark research. It's not in the public domain. Okay, so the stuff in the public domain, which is showing really grainy pictures, and this is not grainy, right? This is unbelievably vibrant and clear and obvious.
Yes.
So I showed one of my key photos, which I can come on to shortly. So I'll just share that again. I showed this image to a biophysicist in the US recently. He was the first person with that sort of background who was prepared to make a comment, and his comment was that this was a state-of-the-art example of nanoelectronics. So the first thing to clear up is it's not actually nano, it's actually microscopic. So this crystal, this is a sample of fine-site community that's 4 months old. And this is a bright field image. This is 200 times magnification. So this thing's definitely big enough to see with a magnifying glass. Okay. And I've got photos of this particular crystal, which we'll look at shortly, before this fiber plugged into it. In 2 days after I saw it with the fiber hanging in the air, it was plugging into it. This, I feel, was the most difficult to explain image of anything. Rather than say what is it for, I think we need to the first thing is to say that this is an example of intelligent design. This is intent. You've got a fiber plugging into a crystal. So these complex crystals form when the dry drop dries out. And I was able to reproduce these crystals in 22 through the middle of 23 without any problems after the samples were degrading. What else can I say about them?
And these are from multiple different vials, and it's not just one sample you've looked at.
It was multiple different vials of fine-site community, but most of them were from the same batch. But it's a little bit like climbing Mount Everest, right? You only need to do it once.
Yeah.
Because this image exists, there should be a complete timeout on all of this stuff.
Yeah.
But anybody who's aiming to dismiss this, but failing to engage with this photo, it is clearly trying to distract from the main game, as far as I'm concerned. So this morning I started to put together this compilation of images to just explain how this happens. So in October or early November, it might have been 22, I had an article called What's in the Shots that was in the Spectator magazine. That article actually was published in the UK as well. So Gareth Ike contacted Maria Z and said, how do we get hold of this guy and have a chat? So I said to Gareth, what would be really cool would be to actually, how about we do a live run through one of these slides? And he agreed, and they weren't really set up to do live Zoom feeds, but that's what we did. So this is the same sample. This is a dark field image as opposed to the one we were just talking about, which was bright field. So this is the 7th of December, 2022, and I had a brief, probably 20-minute conversation with Gareth on the Iconic News Network, and I need to do a high resolution frame grab of those first images, but I just wanted to give you the story of how it went down. We can actually watch the video if we've got time. But yeah, Gareth's draw obviously dropped as we were discussing these images. And so 2 days later, I actually did a run through the same slides with Mateo Taylor, who's an engineer in Ecuador. And the Gareth Ike show was recorded on the 7th, but I didn't get a hold of a copy of it until the 10th. So the day before that was released, I looked over the slide with Mateo, and we found that fiber that had been sitting above this crystal had plugged itself in. And it was the most surreal experience. And I've got both videos on my website, so people can work through them. So this one's under my interviews under Gareth Ike, and the second one is under my discussions with Matt Taylor.
We might not play any videos just for copyright and all that, David, but I think people can get a pretty good idea. It's pretty clear that wire is connected. It almost looks like it's...
Yeah, well,
Yeah.
we can play the video with Mateo if we want to, because I own copyright, but the other one's probably, I'm not sure if there's copyright issues there, probably is, I guess. But that's there as a low resolution sort of line up of the two.
Crazy. Absolutely
It
crazy.
is. It's completely crazy. So if you put aside everything else I've done, nobody has owned up to this or wanted to debate this sequence. So I've in that paper that I went through and showed you, I've actually written this up in some detail. Let's see if I can go back to it. Yeah. So that's the bright field image, just showing the fiber connecting in various points, and you can see there's actually a number of different strands. This one goes in and plants into the middle of that square, right? It's just nuts. But so I've called that whole process the plugged in phenomenon, for want of a better word. And I've got a contents page in the wrong place, but here we are. So we can just go straight to it. So if anybody wants to get a handle on all the background, so I've gone through this in some detail about how it happened, and that's the base, pretty close to the size of that crystal. And then I've got a few more images. So this is 100 times magnification. This is that one at 200 times. And there's a few others. I've probably got about 100 images and about 10 hours of video of the structure. But this close-up's quite good. So this is a close-up dark field image, and you can see the different strands with the colloids in them. These are the same size as the bright materials that we actually saw in the vaccine when it was liquid. This is a close-up one of that. Right, so that's been sort of front and center of my thinking for the last 3 years, and most people don't want to talk about it.
So what's next?
What's
your hope? What's your hope, David? That people who do you want to sort of get in touch with? Have you touched base with Dr. Mike Yeardon from Pfizer, or how do we get to the next step to exposing this?
I was on a 4-hour meeting with Mike Yeardon and Ryan Fulmick, Enemy Houcher, Karen Kingston, and Shimon Yanowitz for the International Criminal Court. I think it was early 23. And Mike Yeardon certainly come out, and I've got an email from him saying, you can put me on record as saying the vaccines were definitely designed to hurt people, unquote. But he didn't want to go near the technology or the nanotechnology. One of the biggest criticisms of all of this is that what we're seeing there is obviously microscopic. It's not nanoscopic. And I've certainly got other videos which show clouds of particles that we can't resolve that are clearly making self-assembling into materials that are microscopic. And so the functionality behind that crystal and what it's doing certainly seems to be related to particles that we can't see. Yeah. It's really interesting, isn't it? I've thought a lot about this. One of the criticisms has been, we're not going to look, we're not going to comment, you're full of shit. You need to tell us what it's made of before we'll even look or engage in it. Yeah. Which is just patently absurd. I mean, that's just part of the control is, I'm not going to believe anything until I've heard 2 or 3 experts confirm it, and I need to know what it's made out of. But if you wander around a corner and you see a UFO and you get pretty close to it, and there's a power pack plugged in the side recharging it. You actually don't need to know what the UFO is made of to be able to say, well, this requires a little bit more thinking, guys.
Are there other scientists in that have done any metallurgy, or we've seen some of those clips about how they're putting out a signal with different EMF detectors and all that type of thing. So is there kind of a collaboration, as you say, between people like yourself and other doctors around the world that's happening slowly where we are going to get answers?
Yeah, I mean, there's certainly some, there's an awareness of what people are doing, and Matteo Taylor at the moment is using some more sophisticated hardware and software rather than just phones to pick up signals from people that have been vaccinated. So, you can get a stronger signal in the arm where people were vaccinated compared to the arm where people aren't vaccinated. So I've written a paper on the MAC address side of things as well, and that's on the journal website too. So that's probably quite useful to start with. But one of the interesting things is the the app that tells us that this is the MAC address is actually the app that's on the phone. The reality is that software is probably produced by some big tech company originally anyway. So the phone's telling us the MAC address. Mateo's saying with his equipment that it's not a MAC address. It's a signal that the phone and the software in the phone is interpreting as a MAC address.
Okay.
It's being cloaked, if you like. And he can pick up the carrier away, but he can't decrypt anything that's inside it. So we don't know how much information is available, how it's been transferred, and what it means.
Okay.
It's a little bit like looking at that plugged in crystal. We can just sort of look at it and go, yeah, that doesn't make any sense, but we've really we're so far behind. So we must be 100 years behind technology-wise, because there's no papers available in the world that will come close to that type of image. Nothing.
Yeah, absolutely. Like I fully believe whatever they've got in these deep underground, dark budget places is well and truly beyond. And you look at how fast technology is accelerating, even in our realm now with AI and stuff. The mind boggles what they could possibly have that's decades more advanced.
Yeah.
Well, David, where do you want to go now with the conversation? What else do you think is important for people to understand at home?
Well, I think that I'm pretty comfortable that the technology is modular and there are different aspects of it in different areas. So we've spent we being me and a group of other interested people who have picked up microscopes. We've done a lot of looking at dental anesthetics. And it seems quite clear that the technology in dental anesthetics is on a par with what we're seeing in the Pfizer. It's different. It's definitely different, but it's definitely similar. So we've seen plugged in crystals on a couple of occasions with a dental anesthetic as well.
Interesting.
So yeah, and I've written a paper about that. And then there are certainly commonalities between what we're seeing in the blood and what we're seeing in the urine. Mainly the blood is what we're looking at, and what we're seeing in the vaccines in terms of the fibers and even in terms of some of the crystals. Although, having said that, the crystals in the blood don't look anything like the ones that I've just shown you.
How much do you know about how to possibly get rid of this? Is it something that certain frequencies might cause them to sort of disband, or is there things we can take, natural things, to expel this? Or what are your thoughts on how to remove it?
Yeah, so we've obviously been thinking about that a lot as well. So I think it's useful to okay, I'll digress a little bit. So the question is, how does that fiber form? I mean, it's too small to be made in a factory, obviously. So it has to form. How's the templating done? How is that actually produced? And I think the answer to that is it's formed in a field, in a coherent field, and that's probably driven by 5G or those sort of high-level non-biological fields, if you like.
Yeah.
So, and what evidence is there for that? Well, if we take some example like a snowflake, How does a snowflake form? How do you get three axes of symmetry? How does one point of the snowflake know that it has to be identical to the other bit over there? The only way that that happens is if the snowflake forms in a static field or electrostatic field. Um, and then there's research that's been happening for 30, 40 years where they've subjected um, developing or eggs and cells that are dividing to various electric fields, various voltage gradients. Now, there's the Seeber-Geiger experiments that were conducted by Seeber-Geiger, I think it was the 90s, and that they took spores from ferns that or modern day ferns, and they subjected them to a field, and they were actually resulted in a genetic throwback. And they grew fern that hadn't been seen on the planet for hundreds or thousands or millions of years. And then they did the same thing with trout eggs, and they were able to, by subjecting the trout eggs to an electric field, they were able to bring back a wild trout that hadn't been seen alive for over 100 years.
I've
So
seen
there's
experiments done as well with like little tadpoles where different frequencies could cause them to grow heads at both ends or tails at both ends or even grow into a different species depending on the
Yeah,
frequency
I'm
values.
glad you picked that up. That is where the work has gone, and that's Michael Bevan, um, who I who's in the States. I'm not 100% sure where, and certainly by knowing there's a polarity difference between the head and the tail, and if you manipulate that, you can end up with a two-headed worm or a no-headed worm.
Yes.
The crazy thing about that is you think, okay, well, we subjected them to that field and they produce the two-headed worm, so we'll leave them alone. And it's all because of the genetics. So we'd expect the next progeny to go back to normal, but they don't. So you can induce a permanent change by subjecting uh, an electric field at that point, so that the subsequent generations will have two heads. Anyway, so I think it's done by is formed within a coherent field. And that makes sense of some of the other videos that I've written about in terms of how things construct and deconstruct. And I've actually got videos of things being constructed microscopically. And the key video there was what was known as the robot arms video. And that's on my website. I should have called it the robot arms video. I might go back and change that. It's on the website as construction video 1. It's actually a 3-hour video. Most of the action happens in the first 90 minutes. And I've got that at various speeds because it happens very slowly. So they're available for download so people can have a close look at that if they want to. But I think that process is happening in a non-biological coherent field. And I think that's, it's that 2.5 gigahertz type of field. It's at the Wi-Fi frequencies or 5G frequencies. And Matt Taylor early on, and I've got his early videos on my website as well. He was on Stu Peters in 2022 at about the same time, or before, actually well before he started looking, well before I did. But what he actually had a setup where he had his microscope in a Faraday box that he built, and he put a antenna from his Wi-Fi underneath the stage of the microscope. And he was able to show that he could make crystals shrink and grow depending on whether the Wi-Fi was on or not. And I've got copies of that discussion on the website. So I listened to it and I thought, well, that's pretty interesting. So what I did, because I didn't have the engineering expertise, so I just prepared two samples of Pfizer, and I put them both in slide boxes, and I put one inside the Faraday bag and I left the other one nearby on the microscope. And the slide that was in the Faraday bag didn't grow square complex crystals, just grew blobs. And so my first interview about that was with Sasha Letbova in October 22, and that's on my website as well.
Yeah.
So there was quite a lot of interest, late 22, about how these crystals would form in the presence of Wi-Fi and not form in the absence of Wi-Fi.
Yeah.
Turns out you can disrupt these biologically inappropriate fields by more biologically appropriate fields, and so one of the easiest things to do so I'll come back to the dental anesthetic. So between 10 or 11 of us, we've looked at well over 25 different brands of dental anesthetic from manufacturers all over the globe, and they're all similarly contaminated. The thing about nanoparticles is you don't need much of them. So I looked at a Japanese product that was 95+% made in Japan, but they still got some buffers and bits and pieces from China. So they still got a big enough proportion of the actual material into the factory from outside to induce the contamination. But I found that by putting the vials on orgonite, so orgonite is really interesting product that was developed in the 90s in response to work from Willem Reich from the 1950s, and it's material that's usually a 3% resin, a third quartz, and a third metal filings. And you can use quartz powder or you can use quartz crystals. And I had a friend in South Africa make me up some orgonite discs early on because he was very experienced in doing it. It seemed like a good idea. And I found that just by putting a dental ampule on the orgonite, it would disrupt the ability for the tech to form. For the crystals to form. So that in itself is pretty nuts, right? So if what I'm looking at is nothing, and orgonite's hasn't got a detectable field, right? So it shouldn't do anything. The fact that I can demonstrably, and we've repeated this several times, put an ampule on the orgonite for a couple of days, and then repeat the drawing of the drop under the microscope, and it'll be fundamentally different. So I've written all that up as well. That's about paper number 6, where I just walk through that process. I've got several appendices in that paper. I go into maths experiments in more detail. I talk about my experiences with colloidal gold, which is probably worth a quick discussion shortly. But it turns out that the orgonite produces this low-level static field, and it seems to override the Wi-Fi or whatever else is going on. So, there's obviously a lot of work to be done, but We haven't found a dental anesthetic or even just plain local anesthetic that's not affected, but treating for a couple of days with the orgonite and preferably longer, the effect seems to be, I've looked at it after about 2 weeks, and it seems to, the longer you leave it, the better. Um, so the conclusion is, for me, is that biologically appropriate fields will help. Because so if you like, this stuff self-assembled in non-biologically active fields, Wi-Fi, 5G, towers, solar panels, smart meters, flat screen TVs, whatever. But they don't form when you're under trees in the bush or by the river or whatever. So the experience with looking at blood is quite interesting. So the people who seem to have the best blood, not necessarily those that didn't get vaccinated. In fact, it's after the first 3 months of rollout of the vaccines, we couldn't tell from looking at somebody's blood whether they'd been vaccinated or not. So everybody's got this material in their blood, and most of the material seems to come from hydrogel. So it's probably worth talking about hydrogel. But hydrogel can be electrically or field responsive. So it's probably the hydrogel that's integral to the delivery of this functionality, if you like. I suspect the particles that we're looking at hold the information, and the hydrogel is the one that provides that structure. But I don't know that for sure. That's my best guess at this stage. But the people that had the best blood were those that meditated and prayed.
Okay.
So we know that when you go into a meditative or a prayer state, you change your brain waves to alpha waves, and they have a frequency of 7.8 hertz, which seems as human frequency. So putting yourself into that low level, natural, biological, coherent field seems to be really helpful.
That's pretty crazy with everything happening around the world and people kind of saying we're in some sort of spiritual war of good versus evil. That, as you say, being out in nature, I always feel better, and a lot of people comment that. But then you say meditation and prayer and that type of thing as well. It's just fascinating how this all seems to tie together with this one evil agenda, good versus evil.
Yeah. So that's two things. That's a way of treating the anesthetic. The difficulty is, how do we get? So a lot of people are doing that themselves, but that's not particularly easy to organise. You've got to have a dentist who's prepared to let you have it. You can treat it without taking it out of its sterile packaging. But you've got to recognise there's a problem before you can recognise that treating makes any sense. I mean, it just does your hidden, right?
Yeah.
Okay. The other thing, there's a couple of other things that seem to be really helpful on a population basis. One is sodium citrate. Now, sodium citrate is the citrate salt of sodium, as the name would suggest. So it's like table salt, but instead of chloride ions, you've got citrate ions. And there's quite a lot of research and quite a lot of written in the literature about sodium citrate disassembling sodium alginate and probably lanthanide hydrogels. So sodium citrates is safe and very few side effects, can cause a bit of nausea at high dose. You've got to be a bit careful if you've got liver problems, but it's in urine sachets. which people take regularly for
from
your
the pharmacy. Yeah.
yeah, over the counter. So you can buy a kilo of sodium citrate powder from food manufacturing supplies because it goes into yogurt and cheese and things. So it's easy to get hold of and it's cheap. I have 2 grams of sodium citrate every morning. Um, and certainly colleagues have used it with people that have been unwell. Um, Often people seem to be unwell with headaches and fatigue and nausea and things after they've been exposed to EMF or they've been in an environment where they suspect that's what's happened.
Mm.
And they often seem to respond to sodium citrate. And we have pushed the doses up to 5 grams twice a day for a while. So that seems to be really helpful. The other thing is activated charcoal. So I try and have half a teaspoon of activated charcoal powder 3 or 4 times a week. Uh, and sodium citrate. So the logic is if the sodium citrate disassembles some of the hydrogel, then the charcoal will help to remove it. So as the blood goes through your gut, the charcoal that's in your gut will help to remove the hydrogel. And we do have, it was one careful experiment that was done by a colleague in Sydney, um, and she was able to show that significant reduction in hydrogel over a week with taking activated charcoal. So we're pretty comfortable that works and it's safe. You just got to watch out for constipation. So those are 2 population level interventions that everybody can get onto and afford. Basically, you can buy,
Fantastic.
a kilo of activated charcoal pretty cheap, enough to last you a couple of years pretty cheaply as
Yeah.
well.
Well, David, we've been running about an hour now. Do you have any final thoughts for people at home? Anything we haven't touched on today that you think's really important? And we'll have to have you back on again in future, and once we get more info about all this too.
Yeah. Um, yeah, I think it's useful for people to have their blood looked at under dark field microscopy. I've written a paper about what we typically see. I certainly think it's helpful in the right hands if somebody's unwell to have a look. Um, I think it's a good educational experience to be able to see what hydrogels look like in your blood and what's actually going on. I think that's useful. And a small group is at the moment are trying to develop a matrix for assessing how that looks. There's not really anything useful in that department at the moment. Uh, yeah. Did you want to talk about the court case?
Oh, I mean, yeah, if you want to give us a quick overview, I mean, we've had Gary Fecky on the show talking about how he's been through. We've had Dr. William Bay on the show, so people are pretty familiar with how ARPA basically just go after you and try and silence anyone that's not going with the narrative. But yeah, what was your story?
Well, I guess where mine's been palmed off to the medical board at the moment. So it's medical board versus Nixon at the moment. And they came up with 18 allegations that I'll put on my website for anybody that wants to have a look. But basically, it was promoting vaccine hesitancy. I had to think about this yesterday. I think vaccine hesitancy means that my arguments for not having it are better than their arguments for taking it. Otherwise, there wouldn't be any hesitancy, right?
Yeah,
You know,
yeah,
So after spending a week going through their allegations, I mean, their strategy is to basically try and get people to engage, to get people really wanting to get their registration back, and then make their arguments so that you can argue them basically, because then you're engaged on their terms. So I decided I wouldn't do that. I decided I wanted to find out what the medical board's position was with regard to the Nuremberg codes in informed consent and patient autonomy. Because I felt if we were arguing that, it's a better place to start, right?
Yeah.
So at my directions hearing, which was the week before last, they finally, I asked them 5 or 6 times to provide in writing what their position was. They made some interesting comments. The comment was that the Nuremberg Code has essentially been replaced by more updated legislation, and particularly the resolution from the World Medical Association 2022. I'll come back to that. Then the other thing that they made clear was that they didn't regard the vaccinations as being experimental, which I thought was an extraordinary position to adopt. So in terms of the Nuremberg Code, I've spent quite a lot of time looking into that, and did a chat with Cafe Lockdown more specifically on that over the weekend. So there was a chap called Leo Alexander, who was instrumental in putting the code together, and he actually came up with 6 principles, and they map almost 1-to-1 on 2 principles of the Hippocratic Oath. Okay, so they're pretty fundamental in terms of putting the patient first and don't do anything that doesn't have a good reason for, and all that obvious sort of stuff, right?
Yeah.
So to say that the principles are no longer relevant or don't have standing or have been replaced is also not a good position, right? So then I looked at the resolutions from the World Medical Association. It's really clear that we've gone from a situation where the individual has rights to sort of a collective institutional perspective. So the World Medical Association, it's all about vaccines being available for everybody, and it talks about the doctors complying with the vaccination program. It's basically they had to hollow out, if you like, the Nuremberg Code to where we are now, to allow what happened 4 years ago to occur.
Yep.
Otherwise, it would have been stopped. So when I was at medical school, we had a couple of cases that where things were radically changed and the Nuremberg Code was used as the platform for that change. But it wouldn't be now. So that's where I'm going to be positioning my discussion, and that ties in very much with the pregnancy situation, and the fact that we've always regarded pregnant women as very, very high risk in terms of any new intervention, and we always allow plenty of time before we go near exposing pregnant women to new substances.
Yeah.
So none of what happened made any sense, and it was completely uh, um, yeah, I can't repeat the words I was saying. It was completely mind blowing.
Well,
um,
even more blowing
trying
that we
to,
now know that all these politicians gave themselves exemptions. Even the head of the WHO came out and said that he hadn't got it, and all this type of thing. So it's just people, if they're not awake by now, you've got your head buried in the sand, really.
well, it's 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 easy to say that within this group and the people listening, but there are large groups within our society who just don't want to think about it, don't want to go near it. COVID's over, etc., etc. So we need to be getting out of our silos and talking to people who are in other groups. I mean,
Yes.
it really does do you in when we have this sort of conversation that we're having. But, if I walk up the street, 90% of the people, at least, that I meet wouldn't want to go near this conversation.
Yeah,
You know,
that's all right.
I couldn't have it in Bunnings, for example. Um,
All right, David. Well, I do have to wrap up, but really appreciate your time. I'll put all the links to follow David's on socials and website and that down below. And good luck with everything, and we'll definitely have to have you back on again in future.
Thanks, Alex.
Cool. Thanks, David. Thanks, guys.